I don't know if the mic's on. It's on? Okay, good. Appreciate everyone being here. I know y'all are probably looking forward to hearing a good lesson in Revelation from Adam, and that's not what we're getting today. We've been in the other room talking about Christian evidences and a series on that for this quarter, and we're going to continue with one piece of that this week and talk about evolution a little bit. And this is based on a book by Bert Thompson and Brad Harrow, Investigating Christian Evidences. And you think, well, why are we talking about that? Hebrews chapter 11, verses 1 through, or 11, 1 through 3 tell us, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. For by it the people of old received their commendation. By faith we understand that the universe was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. So faith is the assurance of things hoped for but not seen. And as we think about Christian evidences and we think about comparing that to some of the things that the world wants to teach us these days, they have to have faith in what they're trying to believe as well, because they didn't see evolution. They didn't see the beginning of time either. And granted, we have an answer to that. We have God's word that explains it to us, but and we have faith in that. Well, they have faith in what they're believing as well, because that's the definition is things that you haven't seen and you're still believing in it. So today we're going to talk about evolution and macroevolution and microevolution. We're going to get into some more detail on that, but when we talk about that, we're going to explore the scientific method, because basically that's what they hang their hat on, is the scientific method. And that is a method for acquiring knowledge that has characterized the development of science since the 17th century. It includes careful observation, applying rigorous skepticism, and you're going to see that I'm being skeptic of the scientific method in this case, about what is observed, and then it goes on from there. And we can see some definitions on the screen. An assumption is basically a starting point. It's a start of something to look into. A hypothesis is an educated guess or an assumption. A theory is a principle or set of principles that can be used to explain certain phenomenon, things that are going on, and it's supposed to be documented by facts. And we all kind of know what a fact is. So there are multiple steps to the scientific method. And when we're going to use those and talk about that as far as evolution. And at a real high level, microevolution is small changes within a species. So a person's eye color, the baby's eye color, may be different than a parent's eye color or their hair color. Macroevolution is changing from one type of animal to another. A cat changes into a dog. And we don't have that, but that's what they want to talk about, how we got here. So when you look at the 4 steps of the scientific method, the first step is you have to observe and describe something that happened. And obviously we can look at and observe a baby and see what color a baby's eyes are and compare them to the parents, and we can observe that a cat has kittens and we don't observe that a cat has puppies. Okay, then you formulate this hypothesis. You make this educated guess of what happened and how we got there. The method requires you to test the hypothesis. You don't just say, here's what I think happened, and there we go. You're supposed to test it and perform experiments to confirm that the hypothesis you made is true. And if it's not true, you reject it or you modify it and you move on. And then you can establish a theory. The kind of the last step is to establish a theory based on repeated verification of the results. So you test, you retest, And if you can keep proving that, then you can establish a theory at that point. So those are the main steps of the scientific method. I will point out they have not observed macroevolution. Of course, no one was here to observe the beginning of mankind, except I guess Adam, once he got here at that point. And we also know that macroevolution's not been observed. The theory is supposed to be based on verifying repeated results, replicating test results. And we've kind of, in this time in our society, we've even moved past calling it the theory of evolution. They just assume that it's a fact. And that's because there are 4 steps to the political science method, a little different than the regular science method. And this is somewhat in humor, okay? You observe an opportunity to gain or make money or power, and you formulate a theory based on the best personal effect for you, and use propaganda networks to declare that it's a scientific truth or the science is settled. You'll hear those phrases in today's world. They use those for things like mask mandates, and they use those for things like climate change. And of course, you have to criticize that folks that don't roll along with you. When I was young, back in the 70s, the scientists decided there was going to be a mini ice age, and they were worried about the global temperature drop, which I think was caused by Mount St. Helens or one of the volcanoes went off and the temperature went down. And then we got to talking about global warming. And then winter came around and they changed it to climate change. Back when I was young, we used to call them seasons. But things do change. All of the scientists agree that the science is settled. We do have seasons. All right, back to evolution. As you look through these slides, you're going to see text in blue, and the text that's in blue comes from the scientific literature, the encyclopedia, and so bear that in mind when you see it in blue. That's kind of what they're saying, and then some of my entertaining musings may be there in black. So just keep that in mind. So evolution has been around since mid-19th century. Charles Darwin is credited. He wrote the book, The Origin of Species. And we know that it passes through the genes from a parent to their kids in reproduction. There can be mutations, and changes can be made by mutations and other changes with that genetic variation, they call it. And you'll hear the term natural selection. They'll use the term survival of the fittest or natural selection. But in other words, your parents, if they both have blonde hair and blue eyes, then the chances that's what the baby's going to have. That's how that's going to work out. And again, this was conceived by Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace in 1859. The book, The Origin of Species, was written. And we do see mutations in the world. They're extremely rare, thankfully, because over 99% of mutations are a bad thing. Okay, if you think about it, you can have, it causes, it's like birth defects, is what most mutations, that's the kind of thing we're talking about. And I think when you see this piece of it, of course, they're relying on mutations to cause evolution over millions of years, and that's the thing that they look at. But when we look at it, and it's almost all negative, I think you can use that to say, look, you had a perfect design, because if it was not a perfect design, then half the mutations should be a good thing and half would be a bad thing. That would be the normal bell curve of way things would work out. But in our case, I think you're seeing that no, that is not the case. We had a excellent design, and things are not getting better due to mutations. But macroevolution doesn't happen microevolution, little changes happen. Let's dig into that a little bit more. And this slide shows how you classify a biological species. How do you get to where does man lie on the chart? So you start working down the left side and you see a domain and a kingdom and a phylum and a class, an order, a family, a genus, and a species. The species is the lowest level, the finest level of detail of how they classify an animal or a plant. And you can see also on the right hand side how man is classified. So in biology, you have the basic unit is the species ranking. And the also part of the definition of this is that a species is two, you have to have at least two of them, and they have to be able to reproduce. Okay, so to be a species, you have to have two of these organisms, and they have to be able to reproduce. There are about 8 to 9 million species. So when you think about it, you can have a frog, and you can have a frog that has 2 green toes, and you can have a frog that has 3 green toes, and that would be a different species. A hybrid, like if you take different types of corn and mix them, you can create a hybrid, and a hybrid corn doesn't reproduce, it's infertile. So a species has to be fertile. We see how man is classified there. It's in Latin. I wish it would evolve and be in English because I'm not real good at Latin. So you work down, and our classes were a mammal, where our order is we're a primate, family is a hominidae. Our genus is Homo, and we're Homo sapiens. So that's where man sits on this chart. We're Homo sapiens. Now, of course, they won't say in the scientific literature that there are multiple species of man, but they suggest that there's Homo antecessor, Homo erectus, Homo ergaster, Homo floresiensis. I'm probably not getting these right because they're Latin again. Homo habilis. Here's one I like, Homo rudolphinus. He must have been related to Rudolph, is what I'm thinking. And there's Homo neanderthal cis. You got to put that cis on the end and it makes it Latin, I think. Or is that pig Latin? I forget. Evolution. So they tell us that all life on Earth shares a last common ancestor that lived 3.5 to 3.8 billion years ago. And we'd agree that we had a last common ancestor. We all kind of came out of Noah and Adam at one point. And then it continues on. The fossil record includes a progression from early biogenic graphite to microbial mat fossils to fossilized multicellular organisms. So they're saying we came from graphite. So next time you use a pencil, you might think that's my ancestor. Existing patterns of biodiversity have been shaped by repeated formulations of a new species. So they're saying a new species is speciation. So they do say, yeah, you get new species. Changes within a species, and they've got a word for that, anagenesis, and loss of a species or extinction of a species. And we would agree with that. There is changes within a species, the very bottom level of that previous chart we looked at. And you can have species go extinct and you can have new species. So all of the evolution we see is at that level, and that is microevolution. So we also can see that we inherit, we've talked about the baby inherits traits from its parent, but we don't inherit scales or feathers. We just inherit hair and eye color. A frog might change its patterns of colors a little bit, but it's not going to come out and be a hamster. And we do know that Charles Darwin observed slight changes in the beaks of finches and nobody has observed changes at a higher level than the species level. Okay, so we know what's the Bible tell us about it. If you would turn in your Bibles to Genesis chapter 1, and we'll see what the Bible has to say about animals and how they're laid out. Genesis chapter 1, if you look at verse 12 and you work through the different days of creation, Genesis 1:12, the earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good, and there was evening, and there was morning the third day. So on the third day, you had plants, and it says that they yield according to their own kind. So if you plant corn, what are you going to get in your garden beside weeds? You'll get corn. Deer? Okay. Yeah, rabbits. So if you skip down to verse 21, we look at that and it says, So God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves and which the waters swarm according to their kinds, and each winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. So we see again, when you look at it, that fish, they reproduce according to their own kind. Fish don't come out and create alligators. And birds, the same thing. And then as you just a little bit farther down in verse 24, and God said, Let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things, and beasts of the earth according to their kinds. And it was so. So as we work through what the Bible tells us, it repeatedly, each type of animal brings forth its own kind. Let's move on to common descent. So the current theory of evolution is that all organisms on Earth are descendant from a common ancestor or an ancestral gene pool. Current species are at a stage in the process of evolution, so they don't think it's done yet. With their diversity, the product of a long series of speciation, which was changes within the species, and extinction events. So you have some things going away and little changes within the species. And they got to this from what they considered 4 simple facts. One is that the way that species are distributed can't be explained by local adaptation. And if you decipher that a little bit, they're basically saying that the distribution of species can't be explained by local evolution. Now, God could distribute species however He decided to. He spread them out however He wanted. Their second truth or claimed fact is that the diversity of life is not a set of completely unique organisms, but organisms that share morphological similarities. Okay, so we share, and we'll talk about this a little bit. We share DNA. The design of DNA is pretty much common between all life. And I think that we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. The third one, it talks about vestigial traits. And what that is like you've got an appendix. And so it says that we've got these vestigial traits that they have no clear purpose, but they resemble functional ancestral traits. So you have an appendix, and we don't know what it does, and they agree with that, but it's there because it resembles something that your ancestor needed. So when you went back up this chain of evolution, then the previous, I guess, monkey that was your great-great-grandparent needed an appendix. We don't know what it did then. We don't know what it does now, but that's why you have an appendix. So that's one of the things that they claim is why we have a common descent. I'm not sure about that, but that's what they got. And then the last is that organisms can be classified using similarities into a hierarchy of nested groups similar to a family tree. So you can classify organisms, and we look at how they classify organisms. We just looked at that. And the question I would raise for you to consider is, did a great designer have the forethought to create organisms that could be classified or grouped? And the answer is, a good designer would make a system where they could be organized and grouped. Does the existence of the Dewey Decimal System prove that libraries have evolved? I don't know, but they have the Dewey Decimal System. They can classify books. I don't think having a classification system proves anything, but this is part of what they claim. This next phrase I think is important. Past species have also left records of their evolutionary history, fossils. And so we're going to look and talk about fossils. And this is their claim, and you've got fossils out there. That's not to be dismissed. So past species have left behind fossils and should have a fossil record for us. And they talk about how you can look at these past fossils, the anatomical record, and by looking at that and comparing it to current species and comparing it to extinct species, you can figure out the lineage by looking at these fossils. So you can figure out how we got here. And then they talk again about more recent evidence for common descent has come from the study of biochemical similarities between organisms. All living cells use the same DNA and amino acids. And in our series of classes we had about a month ago, we talked about the probability, the scientific probability that DNA or an amino acid could happen by random in nature. And the answer was, it was like 1 times 10 to the 6,000. And we won't get into the detail here, but if you have something that's a probability, like, just quickly, the lottery is like 1 times 10 to the 6. One chance and 1 with 6 zeros behind it would be chance of winning the lottery. And you're not going to win the lottery. Do not go and spend your money and waste your money. The lottery is a tax on people with poor math skills. But if you take, and your chance of a protein happening has 1 with 6,000 zeros behind it. And not only that, but you have to have a protein chain to make the amino acid. And it would all have to happen, not just one protein, but over 100 of them, the right ones in the right order, in the same place at the same time. And that doesn't happen. Okay, so we know we came from a common descent, originally from Adam and Eve, and later from Noah and his family. The scientists tell us that the fossil record should be there. They still only talk about changes at the species level, the lowest level, and we're going to talk about missing links in the fossil record a little later in this. So we've talked about DNA, and to me, DNA would show having a common DNA design, a similar DNA design among all animals shows a common designer. If you think about it, having something in common in many other cases shows a common designer. Does anyone here drive a Subaru? Okay, so Gary drives a Subaru. Is the engine in a Subaru Outback the same as a Forester and the same as a Crosstrek? I think they are. I think it's a common design. Who here has a DeWalt cordless drill? A bunch of people. So is the battery for your DeWalt drill common with the battery for your DeWalt saw and for your DeWalt skill saw and your cordless saw and your jigsaw and your your pruner and your chainsaw? Yeah. Did that happen by evolution or did that have a common design? It's a common design. So right, cars are basically the same. I've been through the car plant in Doraville, and they were making minivans. Well, there was the Montana, you had the Chevy van, you had the Buick van. They all go down the exact same line, and all that's different is the trim. It's the same engine, it's the same drivetrain, it's the same body, it's just trim. So common design doesn't necessarily prove that things evolved from one piece of graphite. So when we were growing up, most folks here are old enough to remember what they called evolution then. They called it the theory of evolution when I was in school, but it was the tree of life. And so you had this series of, from early things on up through the different, the apes and on demand kind of thing. And it was the tree of life. You had the trunk and you went down these branches and you had that was the theory back when most of us were growing up. So modern research has suggested that due to horizontal gene transfer, things changing horizontally instead of going up the trunk and out the branch, that this tree of life theory was more complicated. And since trees just have branches that spread in one direction, that it created problems. It wasn't right. So to solve this problem and others, the authors prefer to use the term now coral of life instead of tree of life. And I like the ocean, so this is nice. I think this is an improvement. I thought it's interesting because they are the ones that said this solved the problem with the tree of life and others. They knew that there were problems. I see this as sort of a scientific duh moment. Yeah, we had a problem here. Let's call it something else. We'll call it a coral. And this is the current theory of evolution of life, and it does serve to fix some of the practical and conceptual difficulties that they had with their theory. And I use theory in a loose sense. Okay, so corals are superior to trees, and this is what they say. The first thing is that only the uppermost part of a coral head is alive. Where if you've got a tree, everything from the bottom of the roots up through the trunk, out the branches to the tips of the branch, where you would be at the tip of a branch, the whole tree is alive. But obviously, our ancestors are not alive. We don't have cavemen wandering around among us. So the coral of life fixes this problem in that only the outer part of the coral is alive. The main inner body of the coral is no longer alive. The next thing is that the coral begins out as a little small colony, a little clump, and it grows upward and it grows outward, but it grows from that little clump, it expands upward and outward. Where a tree, if you plant a seed, a tree grows up, but the tree also grows down. The tree has to have roots similar to how it has what you see above ground. Some trees have a big tap root, some have a bunch of little roots. It just varies. John, did you have a I agree. And for those who didn't hear it, basically John was saying their claim, one of the problems their claim is that macroevolution was happening back before, but if it was going to continue to happen, we should see that. We should see, every once in a while a cat has a litter and one of them doesn't come out a cat or a mouse, something that you think of animals that reproduce at a much quicker rate. You should see mice that come out as guinea pigs or something like that, and we don't see that. And they don't claim that evolution is necessarily done. They claim it should continue. They just don't We don't see it. And if you think back to that definition, that scientific definition, you should be able to see it, do experiments to find it, and reproduce those experiments. Any other comments? Mr. Ryan. Mhm. Right. A great comment. Ryan talked about the fossil record and how we have all of these fossils. You have fossils of elephants from way back that are similar to fossils of elephants that exist now. You have fossils of all these different animals, and we're going to talk about the missing link in about 3 slides. So I'm going to talk about Lucy. Most of y'all are probably seem like we had that in our textbooks in the 70s. So it's been around since that ancient history. But we're going to talk about there's. Good comment. And basically, she was saying that they found the appendix can help fight with infections, or there could be, when you were in the womb, it could be of use. So they found uses for what these vestigial organs that we don't necessarily know what they're about. And this is all good discussion. I know we talked about other scientific things you see, science that was predicted by the Bible, and yet mankind didn't know about it for centuries to come. We talked about that last week in class. Good comments. I appreciate the comments. We're we were talking about trees. Trees grow up, trees grow down, and obviously evolution doesn't devolve. In theory, it should, but it does not. They only talk about this evolution or the survival of the fittest. Another thing that they had a problem with trees is that when you look at a tree, the biggest, the fattest part of it is the trunk, and it gets narrower as you go up the trunk, and then the branches are narrower, and then you go to the little branches, and then the twigs, and it keeps getting smaller. The diameter of the tree decreases from the trunk to the twigs. Where a coral, you can have a coral that's small at the bottom, and then it's this giant coral head, and so it expands. They're wider than they are, wider at the top than below, and this symbolizes, and they have a bunch of big words there, but it symbolizes that the population has expanded in time. Then the other thing that I was surprised, because they didn't really get into this when I was a kid in history. Tree branches never fuse, whereas coral branches can exhibit anastomosis or something like that. Big words. I like this in biology. They use a lot of these big words in it. I think it helps them feel smarter than me, because they are, but I can struggle with some of these big words, and I think there's a reason they do that. But it represents horizontal evolutionary events. And what they're trying to tell you here is that basically the caveman and modern man can intermarry and create something else. That you can have something evolve and come off this branch, and that branch can come back and intermarry and have youth come from these branches that come back together. And so that's part of the theory, is that it's not a linear evolution from a caveman to a current man, but it can make all of these branches, and all these branches can go back or forth. And what I think about when I hear that is, one, if you look at a tree or a linear tree of life, then and we're going to talk about where are the missing links. If it's linear, to get from this level of ape to this next level to this next level, you have to have a few missing links to go down this line. But if it's this giant web of coral, there has to be thousands or millions of missing links, because it's this whole record, and it's expanded, and it can go out and come back in. By design, it would require many, many more missing links than not. And so I put on there, where's the coral reef? And if you think about it, we look at a coral reef. The Great Barrier Reef is the world's largest coral reef system, and it's composed of over 2,900 individual reefs, 900 islands, stretches for over 1,400 miles, covers 133,000 square miles, and the reef is located in the Coral Sea off the coast of Queensland, Australia. It's so big it can be seen from outer space. My slides are getting ahead. Okay. Y'all stick with me up there. I'm going to talk for a while. Can be seen from outer space. It's the biggest structure created by living organisms in the world. The scientists tell us that there's a record, there's a fossil record. We have fossils, they're real, but where are the missing links? Where are the changes at a higher than a species level? Okay, so we're going to go on to the next slide. This picture, and I actually searched for Java Man, the picture of Java Man, and this came up. And this may be a picture of Nebraska Man, the artwork that goes with their different missing links. And we're going to read about some of those in just a moment. But this picture shows this erect man, this erect caveman, and another caveman, and he's got him a nice stick. And so this is either the artwork that goes with Nebraska Man or Java Man. I wasn't there back then, so I'm not sure which. So here is a list of some of the missing links. You have to bear in mind that anthropologists have searched for the missing link for human bones more than they've searched for any other kind of bone. Okay, they go out and they do these digs and they find all of these, these different dinosaurs, but they work real hard at finding human bones. And this information comes from a book, A Matter of Fact by Kyle Butt. And when we think about it, we saw that picture, and you got pictures in your family photo album. You probably have seen that drawing or others before. And some of the famous missing links are going to be this hairy ape-like creatures. Neanderthal man was one of the first ones, and he was an ape-like creature that looked like he belonged in a cave. And the Dr. A.J.E. Cave proved that this was nothing more than an old man who suffered from arthritis, a modern old man that had arthritis and was sort of crippled over. Nebraska man. Nebraska Mound was what was constructed to be the missing link, and this is could be that one that we saw in the drawing. And so you've got that drawing of him and his friends. And Nebraska Man was an ape-like creature when he was drawn, and it was later discovered that the artifact was actually the tooth of an extinct pig. So all they had to do that drawing was a tooth. They didn't have a whole skeleton. That's all they had. Piltdown Man. This was thought to be a genuine missing link for over 40 years. It was later determined that someone had faked this missing link by combining the skull of a human and the jawbone of an ape. Java Man, also called Homo erectus, and he was supposed to be the one that gave rise to human beings, Homo sapiens. He was created from 4 fossils. They found 2 teeth, a skull cap, so the top of a skull, and a leg bone. It was later discovered that the leg bone and the teeth were human, and the skull cap was from a Gibeon monkey. Lucy. Ryan was leading me right to Lucy. Lucy was one of the most famous one. I'm sure most of y'all have heard about Lucy. And it is one of the most complete fossilized skeletons because they got pieces from, as Ryan said, from different places. And for many years, they thought this was a small creature that walked upright, and it was one of our ancestors. Later evidence showed that most of the bones were of an ape, so it wasn't even human bones. Homo habilis, or handyman, supposedly evolved from Lucy, although it was supposed to be about 2 million years later. And it was later determined that it was a human adult. It was a female monkey that stood about 3 feet tall. And rumor has it that it walked the aisles in the old Kmart and Mono in the hardware section and gave people help, but it's hard to say. Orse Man. So Orse Man was found in Orse, Spain. That's where the Orse came from. Single piece of a skull was found near the village, claimed to be the oldest human fossil ever discovered in Europe. And later it was determined that it was the skull cap of a young donkey. Rhodesian Man. This was a skeleton found in a zinc mine in Rhodesia in 1921. It was displayed in the British Museum for many years. And basically it had smashed hip bones in it, and they thought it stooped over like an ape man. So I'm going to just close out by talking about we have not observed macroevolution. They have a hypothesis. They have not been able to test or prove their hypothesis. And they call it a theory, but it really scientifically shouldn't even be called a theory. 1 Peter 3:15 tells us, "But in your hearts honor Christ the Lord is holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. So as we covered a lot of ground today, just remember that we're supposed to be ready as Christians to give an answer for what we believe, and that includes even topics like evolution. I appreciate all the comments. Thank you.